Count Saint Germain, the mystery of the immortal alchemist. The Comte de Saint Germain, or Count Saint Germain, was allegedly born in 1691, some accounts say 1712, to 1784. I will say allegedly many times in this podcast, as the mystery of Saint Germain leaves more questions than answers. Unfortunately, many aspects of the Comte's life cannot truly be substantiated, as he possessed a godlike quality that imbued all of his encounters and affairs. Much of what is known about Germain we can ascertain from the people he met and conversed with. It is through these quotations and illustrious accounts that we form a better picture of who this person was. I put person in quotations because it is very apparent from any initial uncovery of Saint Germain or SG mythos that he was not a person like you or I, but rather a very special and perhaps non-human entity. The sheer volume of talents, crafts, abilities, travel, diplomacy, and mastery that Saint Germain bestowed upon our realm could not have been the work of a mere mortal. Indeed, many associates of Germain met him after he had supposedly died. Yet he always appeared to be a man between the ages of 40 and 50, even though his associates were then approaching old age and death. Voltaire said, "He is a man who does not die and who knows everything." Germain was a European adventurer, philosopher, with an interest in science, alchemy, emphasized, and the arts. He flourished in European high society in the mid-18th century or 1700s. He utilized a variety of names and titles such as the Marquis de Montferrat, Count Weldon, Comte Soltikoff, Comte Bellemare, Manuel Doria, Graf Zarogi, which sounds very Tibetan to me, and Prince Rákóczi, which is Hungarian. To deflect his origins, he would claim he was 500 years old. His real name was unknown to the court, his birth and background obscured. Upon old age and closeness to his death, he claimed to be the son of Prince Francis II Rákóczi of Transylvania, the Hungarian Empire. It was believed that his identity was safeguarded as a protective measure from the persecutions against the Habsburg dynasty. If his claim was true, his father Francis was the leader of the Rákóczi War of Independence against the Habsburgs in 1703 to 1711. Very interesting to note that his grandfather, Ferenc Francis Rákóczi, also led an unsuccessful Hungarian-Croatian revolt against the Habsburgs. It is said that in March 1666, Saint Ferenc I Rákóczi married Ionia, daughter of Peter Zrínyi, governor of Croatia, and 4 years later, he joined Zrínyi in a conspiracy aimed at ending Habsburg rule in Hungary and Croatia. The insurrection was put down, and Zrínyi was beheaded in 1671. Rákóczi was spared on payment of ransom, however, through his mother's influence with the Jesuits. Ferenc II Rákóczi, Saint G's father, was born of an aristocratic Magyar family. Both his father and stepfather had led insurrections against the Habsburgs, and Rákóczi grew up in an atmosphere of fervent Magyar patriotism. And Magyar just means Hungarian. That's the name the Hungarians give themselves, actually. He was separated from his mother after the surrender of Munkacs to the Austrians and taken to Vienna and placed in a Jesuit college in Bohemia to be brought up in Austrian ways. He returned to Hungary and found the Hungarian cause and tried to seek help from King Louis XIV of France. Strangely enough, Saint Germain became close confidant of Louis XV and essentially predicted the French Revolution, trying in vain to warn his friends of their inevitable demise. Saint Germain said he was 88 in 1691, so that would have placed Troccosi's age at 15. Saint Germain was apparently educated in Italy by the last of the Medicis, black nobility. Guillaume Gaston, his alleged mother's brother-in-law. He was believed to be a student at the University of Siena. Throughout his adult life, he was deliberately spinning a confusing web to conceal his actual identity and origins, using different pseudonyms in different places of Europe that he visited. He was first known by the title Count of Saint Germain during the early 1740s. He went first to England to compose music and became acquainted with one of the most quoted of his allies, Horace Walpole. He was also arrested under suspicion of espionage, but released without charge during the Jacobite Rebellion. Walpole claimed he was a man of quality, that he was a great musician, pale, with extremely black hair and a beard, dressed magnificently, and had several jewels. Strangely enough, S.G. was receiving large remittances, but made no other figures, and it was unknown how he amassed his fortunes. It was said he had diamonds and other precious gems sewn into the fabric of his clothing. Lady Jemima York described his thrilling private musical performance in London in April and May 1749, where she stated, "He is an odd creature, and the more I see him, the more curious I am to know something about him. He is everything with everybody. He talks ingeniously with Mr. Ray, philosophy with Lord Willoughby, and is gallant with Miss York, Miss Carpenter, and all the young ladies. But the character and philosopher is what he seems to pretend to, and to be a good deal conceited of. The others are put on to comply with les manners du monde, but that you are supposed his real characteristic, and I can't but fancy he is a great pretender in all kinds of science, as well as he really has acquired an uncommon share in some." End quote. After being forced to flee England after his arrest, he entered the French court in 1748. He was employed by Louis XV for diplomatic missions in 1749. Giacomo Casanova describes in his memoirs several meetings with the celebrated and learned impostor. Quote, "The most enjoyable dinner I had was with Madame de Robert Gergy, who came with the famous adventurer known by the name of Count de Saint Germain. This individual, instead of eating, talked from the beginning of the meal to the end, and I followed his example in one respect, as I did not eat, but listened to him with the greatest attention. It may safely be said that a conversationalist he was unequaled. Saint Germain gave himself out for a marvel, and always aimed at exciting amazement, which he often succeeded in doing. He was a scholar, linguist, musician, and chemist, good-looking, and a perfect ladies' man. For a while he gave them paints and cosmetics. He flattered them. Not that he would make them young again, which he modestly confessed was beyond him, but that their beauty would be preserved by the means of a wash, which he said saved him a lot of money, but which he gave away freely. He contrived to gain the favor of Madame de Pompadour, the official chief mistress of the king, who had spoken to him about the king, for whom he had made a laboratory, in which the monarch, a martyr to boredom, tried to find a little pleasure or distraction, at all events by making dyes. The king had given him a suite of rooms at Chambord, and 100,000 francs for the construction of a laboratory, and according to St. G, the dyes discovered by the king would have a materially beneficial influence on the quality of French fabrics. This extraordinary man, intended by nature to be the king of impostors, and quacks would say in an easy, assured manner that he was 300 years old. Jesus, and then I put Jesus' time a little closer to ours, so if if he was 300 years old, then that would mean that, and he was around during the time of Jesus, then that would mean that there was 1,000 years added to our timeline, and Jesus was a lot closer to our time than we have been led to believe. So that, I found that to be of note. Okay, I will continue. That he knew the secret of universal medicine, that he possessed a mastery over nature, that he could melt diamonds, professing himself capable of forming out of 10 or 12 small diamonds, one large, one of the finest water, without any loss of weight. All this, he said, was a mere trifle to him. Notwithstanding his boastings, his barefaced lies, and his manifold eccentricities, I cannot say I thought him offensive. In spite of my knowledge of what he was, and in spite of my own feelings, I thought him as an astonishing man, as he was always astonishing to me. Yet again, Saint Germain was called to the crossroads of history, where he left France for the Dutch Republic, The Hague, during the 7 Years' War. He came to Amsterdam, pretending to borrow money for Louis the 15th with diamonds as collateral. As a diplomat, he tried to open peace negotiations between Britain and France. British diplomats surmised that SG had the backing of Duc de Belle-Isle, and they were trying to outmaneuver the French foreign minister, the pro-Austrian Duc de Choiseul. Britain would not treat with him because his credentials did not come directly from the king. The Duc de Choiseul convinced Louis XV to disavow SG and demand his arrest. Count Bentinck de Roon, Dutch diplomat, regarded the arrest warrant as internal French politicking in which Holland should not involve itself. However, a direct refusal to extradite SG was also considered impolite. De Roon therefore facilitated the departure of SG to England with a passport issued by... out of England. Issued by the British Ambassador General Joseph York. This passport was made out in blank, allowing SG to travel in May 1760 from Helvoetsluis to London. To London under an assumed name. From St. Petersburg, SG traveled to Berlin, Vienna, Milan, Übrigen, Zutphen, Amsterdam, Venice, Livorno, Nuremberg, Mantua, The Hague, and Bad Schwalbach. In 1779, SG settled at Altona in Schleswig, Germany. He became extremely close to Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel, who also had an interest in mysticism and was a member of several secret societies. SG showed the prince fabulous gems and invented a new method of coloring cloth. The prince bestowed him with a factory and materials to administer this process. The prince also funded SG's laboratory for alchemical experiments, just like Louis XV, where they cooperated in creating gemstones and jewelry. It was Charles who Germain entrusted his secret, that he was 88 years old and the son of Hungarian Prince Rákóczi. According to Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel, SG died in his residence at the joint Hesse-Kassel factory on 27 February 1784. After SG's death, Hesse-Kassel refused to answer questions about it. There was a burial service, but no one viewed the body. Yet, Comte de Saint-Germain, in his most regal and outlandish fashion, refused to die. Indeed, it was only a mere year later, after his supposed death in Germany, that his signature appeared on the signatories for the Freemasonic Convention held in Paris in 1785. Prior to Saint-Germain's death, he allegedly formed a secret society within Freemasonry called the Philhellenes, or Truth Lovers, which I will explain in further detail later. In 1786, Catherine the Great of Russia swore that she met a man greatly resembling Saint Germain, again appearing between the ages of 40 and 50. In 1821, more than 80 years after his first appearance in the French court, he was seen by Mademoiselle de Genlis and the Countess de Ahemer, who had met him in 1789. Countess de Ahemer swore she had talked with the Comte at the Church of the Recollects in the summer of 1789 after the taking of the Bastille. She claimed she again saw him in 1815 and 1821. Emperor Napoleon III was so intrigued by the tales of Saint Germain that he appointed a special commission to examine all information on him. The commission found many documents, particularly amongst secret societies, such as the Freemasons. But a mysterious fire in 1870 burned down the hotel where they were kept, and every last document was destroyed. It seemed that Saint Germain would always appear at events of great significance, such as the Treaty of Versailles or the founding of the United States. There was a Major Fraser who appeared in Paris during Queen Victoria's reign. Very similar to the SG of the past, he was wealthy, yet had no concrete background. He disappeared and never reappeared again. There was also an account of Jacques de Saint Germain, or the Vampire of New Orleans, which I will discuss later in the podcast. Only one surviving work by the Comte survive, Les Traits Saint Sophie, written in a cryptic fashion. A translated portion is detailed here. We move through space at a speed that can't be compared with nothing but itself. Within a fraction of a second, the planes below us were out of sight, and the Earth had become a faint nebula. So there's a proof for flat Earth for you guys out there, because it said the planes below us are out of sight. Another puzzling fragment from the legend remains, a letter from Voltaire to S.G. I reply to your letter you sent me in April, in which you reveal frightening secrets, among which the most terrible for an old man like me, the hour of my death. Thank you, Germain. Your long journey through time will be illuminated by the friendship I have for you, until the day your revelations will come true in the middle of the 20th century. The talking pictures are a gift to the time I have left to live. Your mechanized flying machine could one day bring you back to me. Time has not lessened the magical mystery of Saint Germain, only enshrined more confusion, and established him as an ephemeral and yet everlasting being. Part 2 is talents. As soon as the Count had entered the European court, he garnered vast speculation and did nothing to dissuade it. He loved to be the center of attention and delighted in embellishing his brilliance to all. In terms of music, he was a violin and piano virtuoso. He composed the L'Incostanza de Lusa, an opera at the Haymarket Theatre in London in 1745. Also, 2 private musical performances in the same city in 1749. He was a master painter, and according to Baron von Gleichen, the paintings he showed me all bore a stamp of singularity or perfection, which made them more interesting than many artworks of the highest order. He could easily detect forgeries, understand the secret nature of pigments, and painted jewelry. His chemical knowledge comprehended the manufacture of luminous paint that is now used on watch dials today. Germain was an effortless linguist who spoke perfect Greek, Sanskrit, Russian, French, English, Chinese, and several archaic tongues which no one else could recognize. He possessed a silver tongue and was a skilled charlatan, adept at misleading the public. He once stated, "These foolish Parisians believe that I am 500 years old. I confirm them in this idea, because I see that it gives them much pleasure, not that I am infinitely older than I appear." By far, his most incredible asset and skill was alchemy and his ability to create and transform jewels. He never went to the bank, yet amassed a vast fortune, and diamonds and emeralds were woven into his clothing. He made it well known that he was an alchemist and a mystic of great mastery. His skill was so refined that he could remove flaws from diamonds and emeralds, according to Louis XV in 1757. According to a man who claims to be his descendant, he was a true alchemist who created the philosopher's stone, a red diamond or firestone of a large cartage. All of these red diamonds were created by fusing smaller diamonds together. Fortune Saint Germain claims that Saint Germain used alchemy to heal the sick and spoke allegorically, so he was misunderstood. He points to SG as being a representative for spiritual alchemy, transforming lower and lesser emotions into higher levels of spiritual development and learning. And I would argue manifestation of human potential. As discussed much more in the prior section, Saint Germain was extremely involved in espionage, diplomacy, and traveling the world. Although he appeared to be a spy, it was unknown whether he was working for the interests of the French crown or his own agenda. King Louis XV was his trusted associate, and SG was under his protection. The king and the comte did have secret meetings, and SG was dispatched for international missions. In 1745, he was arrested and released mysteriously in England. In 1756, he was seen in India by Robert Clive, but it was again unknown what he was doing so far away from Europe. And again, this will make a lot more sense when I talk about Germain in terms of theosophy, Eastern religion, the Himalayas, Shambhala, and other such concepts. In 1760, he was a diplomat for Prussia and Austria. In 1762, he was actively involved in placing Catherine the Great on the throne of Russia. Although he was always present during all the action and machinations of politics, he was never an official representative. So he was always there, but he was never quite the main representative. So it was always, I would think that would be very much, people would highly suspect subterfuge in cases of that nature. But if he was this immortal being who could basically mindfuck people, like, basically persuade people through his speech. I liken it to Ricky in Trailer Park Boys when he gets caught by the cops and he always somehow can talk his way out of it. It's kind of like that, hypnosis, mesmerized power, which I will talk about at the end of the podcast in relation to Saint Germain. Very similar stuff, but essentially, Jedi mind control, Jedi mind tricks, and how did he always got arrested, but he always seemed to get out of it. And then it was kind of like Jeffrey Epstein in the sense that when he died, he was settled down in this one place, and then, the people around him were like, oh, he's dead, but there was actually no evidence of it. Very similar to Jeffrey Epstein, where it's like, where's the video evidence of him hanging himself in the jail cell? Oh, well, he was on suicide watch and they were watching him cell 24/7, but we don't have any of that footage. It's the same thing. It's almost like Saint Germain knew he had to be dead at some point, but then that would only liken more to his own mystery as he ascended through the ages and continued throughout time. So, all right, so let me take a quarter shot. This has been a great discovery on my part, and a lot less dark than the Black Dahlia. Way less dark than the Black Dahlia. There's darkness, there's weirdness on the edges, tinges of shadows, but no, it's actually, if you talk about alchemy and higher arts, it's kind of an elevated atmosphere. So, cheers to that. So, I have already discussed his diplomacy, his linguistic abilities, his artistic abilities, both in terms of music and of painting. And then this is the part that always intrigued me the most when I first learned about this a few years ago, was one of the more curious aspects of Saint Germain is the fact that he was never seen to eat by anyone. This is extremely bizarre, as during the time, dinner parties were the main social interaction for the European higher echelon. And so the fact that he was never seen to eat was very strange. He would sip mineral water or red wine only. He often claimed to be a vegetarian and said that his diet consisted chiefly of a special kind of oatmeal. And this immediately just made me think of when Kelsey streamed about the whole is the blue blood, the red blood. The blue blood is the horseshoe crab blood, and it's copper based, and our blood is iron based. It rusts, so that's why we get sicker. And their blood is copper based. Our blood's iron based. They don't want us to eat meat because meat is iron based. They want us to eat vegetables, which are copper based, and grains. So I just thought that was of note, because if he's not eating meat, and perhaps he's not eating anything, and it's interesting because maybe Saint Germain is just an allegory for the old world, because the old world, everything was higher, everything was more evolved, everything was more aesthetically pleasing. And apparently the people didn't eat because there were no bathrooms in these buildings at all, in any of these giant buildings. So that's the thing. Saint Germain could just be an allegory for the old world. The old world manifested in a persona and then carried through the ages, similarly to Tesla, how Tesla has been attributed to all this free energy technological advancement in the early times, when actually he was just reverse engineering everything that already prior existed. And the fact that he was born in Croatia has a shit ton of star forts. Star forts are high tech. They are energy machines, energy vehicles along the ley lines of the Earth energy grid. So, okay. Continuing on with Saint Germain and he didn't eat, kind of like a vampire. It's also, he dined with others chiefly because he enjoyed conversation and never seemed to pass up an opportunity to impress others. He was also never observed sleeping, which lends to either the myth that he was an ascended master, positive, or vampire, negative. He kept his own hours based on his own whims. He believed that avoidance of strong emotions was key to great mental and physical achievements. And that's very critical in Buddhism and Eastern religions, to not be so controlled by your passions, to go to the middle way, which is kind of between both extremes. He was reminiscent of Eastern holy men, and according to the Theosophists, he frequently visited Tibet and the Himalayas. And this is also extremely similar to the Vril Society, if you guys know anything about that, in Nazi Germany, or prior to Nazi Germany. The Vril. Vril just basically means life force, prana, chi, energy, aether, whatever. There's various names for the same concept. And the Nazis themselves went to Tibet to study the mysteries of the old world. By something akin to telepathy, this is a quote about him, and it's very interesting. By something akin to telepathy, this remarkable man was able to feel when his presence was needed in some distant city or state, and was able to act quickly and render himself instrumental in affairs. It was even recorded of him that he had the disconcerting habit of appearing in his own apartments and those of his friends without resorting to the conventionality of the door. So, maybe he crawled in through the bathroom window, or he just... Madame Blavatsky claims he could walk through walls. Alice Bailey, they claim he could walk through walls. So, you got that going for you. You got powers. If You know exactly where you need to be meted, and you could telepathically communicate with other human beings or read their minds. Of course, you're going to be like ahead of the curve. And that's what we find with Saint Germain, is that he seems to be able to predict world affairs with extreme accuracy. And I believe, this is my belief, I know it sounds out there, but I believe that there's these Nazis out in the greater, not space, but the greater Earth. They're out there, and they're kind of watching us. And this kind of all correlates to all that. So, but anyway, I must continue. I don't want to go off too much on a tangent. Okay. I don't know where I was going with that. I will not remember, though. Okay. Lastly, his agelessness and seeming experience of witnessing many critical historical events seems to be his most mysterious aspect. He had an unchanging youthfulness, described by all that came into contact with him. Madame de Georgie, French noblewoman, swore that she meant the Count, calling himself the Marquis of Montferrat in 1710, and that he looked between the ages of 40 and 50. When the Madame saw him again in 1775, she had fallen into old age, and yet the Count looked exactly the same. Okay. So, it's not like to say that this was all made up and fanciful, because we do have these accounts from these historical figures. Many, Voltaire, Casanova, Madame de Georgie, Madame Pompadour. Okay, so part 3 is the Theosophy, and it's very weird. It gets very New Age. It gets very Antichrist, very weird, very quick. But I have to share this part because it was fascinating to me. I did learn about Dangerous World podcast. He did a little podcast about Madame Blavatsky and the 7 root races. And the Aryans, the Lemurians, all of those, the races, the time frames, how basically the Earth, or wherever we are, is just much, much older than we could ever conceive, because there's been all these cycles of races. So, okay, let's get into Theosophy, Madame Blavatsky, and Saint Germain. The Ascended Master. Master Rakoczy. Okay, another thing. Sorry, guys, I was going to get into this, but there is another side note. When I lived in Budapest, there was a part of the city called Rakoczy. And so when I did this research, when I started doing this research, I was like, holy shit, I know that name, because in Budapest, there's an entire area. Well, come to find out, the statue in front of the Parliament building is Francis II Rakoczy, who is Saint Germain's father. And that is the statue. He's on a horse. He's in front of the Hungarian Parliament. He was the one that was trying to overthrow the Habsburgs. If you guys know anything about the Habsburgs were cabal to the core. They look like fucking mutants. Mark Zuckerberg, Habsburg jaw. Sigourney Weaver, Habsburg jaw. Jay Leno, Habsburg jaw. Austrian house. Very sinister, very dark. And so this is where I'm like, could Saint Germain be using secret societies and the good ways to get back to the old world? Because Hungary, the Hungarian language, Magyar, is the language of Tartaria. It is the language of the old world. So there is some tie between Saint Germain and the Tartarians against the controllers. The controllers were the Habsburgs and the House of Saxe-Gotha. Go with Cogburn. I can never say it. It's Queen Victoria, her house. And those few, like, European houses totally just took over everything. And I think the names were pretty much the same everywhere throughout the old world. But they were taken over by these dark forces. And I think the Habsburgs were one of them. So if Saint Germain was an agent against the Habsburgs, for the Hungarians, for the old world, language, the Scythians, then perhaps he was a force for good, even though he was working through the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, and we all know how great they are. So, okay, Master Rakosi, Master R, is a legendary spiritual master of the ancient wisdom and various theosophical and post-theosophical teachings, and is said to be responsible for the New Age culture of the Age of Aquarius, and identified with Count Saint Germain, well-known courtier, adventurer, inventor, alchemist, pianist, violinist, and amateur composer. According to the Theosophists, Saint Germain invented his own name based on Sanctus Germanus, or Holy Brother. In the Ascended Master teachings, Master R is a separate being from Saint Germain. And so that has to do with Gnosticism. The Gnostics view Christ as two different beings. One is the Christ who was in the Christ ministry for the 3-year ministry, who was the Ascended Master, and the other one was the human being. And so, yeah, very interesting. It is not surprising to note that there are many biographies about Saint Germain that do not agree with one another. The main tomes are The Count of Saint Germain, written in 1912 by Isabel Cooper Oakley, and The Comte de Saint Germain, Last Scion of the House of Rakosi, by Jean Overton Fuller in 1988. The former was a composite of letters, diaries, and private records from the French aristocracy who knew S.G. The last book was The Great Secret, Saint Germain, by Raymond Bernards. Okay, so this is where it gets into Francis Bacon, Shakespeare, Queen Elizabeth, and, all of that mental magic that has been perpetrated on us since time immemorial. Okay, I gotta take a quick shot before this section. My goodness. All right, and maybe like a hit of some cheesy deezy. But thank you guys so much for listening to this. I know it's a lot of information. It's probably kind of boring. It's like, it reminds you of history class in high school, but I'm telling you, it's got some gems. It's got some interesting roads, so bear with me. Okay, so onwards and upwards. In this book, Saint Germain is often conflated with Francis Bacon, author of the Shakespearean opus. Bernard claims, as does the Saint Germain Foundation in Schaumburg, Illinois, that Francis Bacon was the child of Queen Elizabeth and Lord Dudley, but that it was kept quiet. According to this theory, Francis was raised by the Bacon family, yet knew of his true birth and left numerous hints throughout the Shakespearean canon of his, in the form of explicit clues in the text of the plays, in pictures, and in the alleged use of Bacon's cipher in the works. Manly P. Hall, in his Secret Teaching of All Ages, describes some of the same attributes as Bernard, including the attribution of the writings, attribution. I couldn't figure out if it's attribution or attribution of the writings of Shakespeare to a great adept like Francis Bacon, who could be amalgamated with Saint Germain. Guy Ballard wrote 2 pieces, Unveiled Mysteries and the Magic Presence, and claimed Saint Germain is an ascended master like Jesus, who is assisting humanity in their soul's evolution. There are 20 volumes in this series. Another important work, the Comte de Gabalas, was said to be from the hand of Sir Francis Bacon before he ascended and returned as Saint Germain. Francis Bacon died prior to the birth of Saint Germain, 1626. The Comte de Gabalas means the Count of the Kabbalah. And I think, you guys, the Kabbalah is essential to understanding any kind of old world mystery. There's a lot of negative connotations with it, and I'm well aware of that. But I think, just like anything else, it's can be used for good or ill. And I know people are probably like thinking I'm satanic saying that, but I really don't give a fuck. I mean, I try to look at things as objectively as I can, and yeah, I don't know. I just think it's a tool. I don't. And it's very clear to me that the controllers, if you guys think like the controllers use the Kabbalah, they don't really use it, because the Kabbalah is all about balance, and they have everything way towards one side of the tree or the pillars. Like, they don't have anything in balance with itself. So I don't think their belief system even aligns with anything in our realm that has even existed, because it's just so out of balance. And I think most traditions incorporate some element of balance into their belief system. Okay. I know I lost probably like 100 viewers by saying that. But I don't know. I like to look at everything and just be objective, because I think if you're certain and you're like, this is the only thing that exists, that's exactly how they trap you. Because if you're narrowly focused on one thing and you can't see around you, you need to have a swivel head and you need to see all that's around you. And you don't have to take everything from it, but I think like the mistake in the truth search is that we hear like a trigger word like 33, or the Kabbalah, and we're like satanic, bad, evil. And I think nothing is inherently evil, in the sense that the controllers just invert things for their own nefarious purposes. So that's my little 2 cents. Okay. Throughout the ages, several theosophists and New Age, but like I think this New Age shit. Oh, sorry, cat. I didn't mean to step on your foot. I think this like New Age shit, in terms of like the theosophists, like is totally fucking weird and sinister. I don't agree with it at all. So just so you guys know. All right. Throughout the ages, although I do like Edgar Cayce a little bit. He appears in this. Throughout the ages, several theosophists and New Age practitioners of alternative esoteric traditions have claimed to have encounters or visions of SG. The key theosophist Annie Besant met SG in 1896, and C.W. Leadbeater met SG in Rome in 1926. Leadbeater claimed he had brown eyes, olive-colored skin, and a pointed beard, and claimed the splendor of his presence impels men to make obeisance. Leadbeater said that SG showed him a robe that had been previously owned by a Roman emperor, and that Saint Germain told him of one of his residences was a castle in Transylvania. And Transylvania was Hungarian Empire, Hungarian, Austro-Hungarian, and Hungarian Empire. And now it's in modern-day Romania. But I have a friend who, she was born there to Hungarian parents. And she moved to the U.S. when she was very young. So she's American. But yeah, so Transylvania is a very beautiful, really cool place, actually. Okay. So this is the part that's kind of creepy. When performing magical rituals in his castle in Transylvania, SG wears a suit of golden... And this is all their, this is their theosophy. This is their claims. I don't necessarily think this is all true. But it's very interesting. And I was talking with Kelsey about this earlier, about the 7 being a number of, like, actually ill. Because they always said, like, 7 is a number of God, but I think 7 could be a bad number, actually, if you think about it. And I'm going to go into it in this shit. Okay, so, I'm going to start over again. When performing magical rituals in this castle in Transylvania, SG wears a suit of golden chainmail, which once belonged to a Roman emperor. Over it is thrown a magnificent cloak of Tyrian purple. And purple is the color of the Phoenicians. With on it, it clasped a 7-pointed star in thrown a magnificent cloak. Oh, sorry, I read that part. In diamond and amethyst, and sometimes he wears a glorious robe of violet. And then I noted the heptagram is used in the symbol for Babylon in Aleister Crowley's occult system, Thelema. The heptagram is known among neo-pagans as the Elven Star or Fairy Star. It is treated as a sacred symbol in various modern pagan and witchcraft traditions. And then Edgar Casey was asked in trance if Saint Germain was present. Casey's reply was, when needed. As an ascended master, Saint Germain is believed to have many magical powers, such as the ability to teleport, levitate, walk through walls, and to inspire people by telepathy, among others. The Theosophical Society bestowed the title of Mahatma, Master of the Ancient Wisdom Adept. Helen P. Blavatsky, or I'm going to call her HPB for short, because it's just easier to say HPB than Blavatsky, because that's just like, Blavatsky. HPB claimed he was one of her masters and gave her secret documents. Some esoteric groups credit him with inspiring the founding fathers to draft the Declaration, Constitution, and providing the design of the Great Seal. So the Great Seal of the United States is actually a symbol of the Moorish world civilization as discovered by Mr. L. Gibson, and so that symbol of the Moors was subverted. And like I said, like with everything else, they take something that can be good or could be used for good, just like the swastika. The swastika is the number one example of this, where they took something that was an ancient symbol. It was literally universal. You can find it in every single continent, every single culture in the old world, and they turned it for ill. And it's just, and I think it's like that with many, many things. I do believe the Talmud and the Sharia law are inherently evil. And I do believe that the Jesuits are inherently evil. So, but I think everything else is open to interpretation. Okay. So, and I believe the Knights of Malta are inherently evil as well. Okay. So, in the New Age movement, I said, the symbol was stolen and inverted for the twisted means of controllers. In the New Age movement, Saint Germain is associated with the color violet, which is the color of the crown chakra, amethyst, and which is, it's quartz, but it's, I believe quartz it's treated in a certain way, UV light or something, where it changes into purple, and purple is very important to the Phoenicians, it's royalty, it has a lot of connotations with, correspondences with chakras and gemstones and colors and frequencies and so on and so forth. Okay. What happened to my tunes? My tunes go. Sorry guys, I'm getting a little bit tired. I've put a lot of work into this and I'm dragging at the end. Okay, my tunes are back. Okay, so in the New Age movement, Saint Germain is associated with the color violet, amethyst, and the Maltese cross in violet. In the Theosophical Society, Saint Germain is the Chohan of the seventh ray. 7 rays are 7 metaphysical principles governing individual souls and unfolding of the 2,158-year-long astrological age. He is heralded as the hierarch of the age of Aquarius and the god for freedom for the system of the worlds. On July 1st, 1956, Saint Germain replaced Jesus, Pisces, as the hierarch of Aquarius. Alice Bailey was a British-American writer of more than 24 books on theosophy and was one of the first to coin the term New Age. She regards Master R as the true ascended master or the great divine director, and also Saint G's teacher in the Great White Brotherhood or Ascended Masters. His spiritual title is the Lord of Civilization, and his task is the establishment of the new civilization of the Age of Aquarius. Bailey stated that sometime after AD 2025, the Jesus, Master R, Saint Germain, Kutumi, and others in the spiritual hierarchy would externalize descend from the spiritual worlds into tangible bodies, and ashrams would spring around them, surrounded by disciples. This blew my mind because I'm going to get into the wandering Jew part at the end. But basically, the wandering Jew is doomed to wander until the second coming of Christ. Then we have this, he's going to come back during the second coming of Christ sometime after 2025. We have Maitreya, we have the end times prophecies, all aligning with Saint Germain, the Theosophists, Jesus. It's just, it blew my mind, guys. I don't know if I'm speaking sense, but crazy to me. But I have to explain the Wandering Jew part at the end, so just hold your horses till that part, because it's crazy. It's so fucking crazy. Okay. Alice Bailey said that Saint Germain is the manager of the Executive Council of Christ. And this is just like, the Executive Council of Christ, this reminds me of like fucking The Office or something. It's just so like bureaucratic. Like, what the hell? Very, very odd. Theosophists regard the Master Jesus and Christ as two separate and distinct beings. They believed in the Gnostic Christianity espoused by Cerinthus, according to which Christ is a being who is incarnated as Jesus. According to Bailey, certain Theosophists, Christ is identified as being a highly developed spiritual entity whose actual name is Maitreya. And I learned about Maitreya when I was in India and when I learned about Buddhism. This Maitreya is the same being known as in Buddhism as Bodhisattva Maitreya, who is in training to become the next Buddha on earth. According to Alice A. Bailey, the Executive Council of the Christ is a specific subgroup of the Masters of the Ancient Wisdom, charged with preparing the way for the second coming of the Christ and the consequent inauguration of the Age of Aquarius. So, I agree. I believe that Christ will come during the Age of Aquarius. I just think so. He's going to come back. It reminds me of South Park with the whole Super Friends, where they had Jesus, Krishna, Muhammad, Thor, and then didn't they have like Aquaman or Seaman or something like that? That's what the Executive Council, it just reminds me of like, and I hope that, I hope that there is a force for good that's trying to act on our behalf, because it seems like the dark ones have just taken over everything. Okay. So this is really interesting, I thought. This talks about, according to the Theosophical Society and the Ascended Master teachings, Saint Germain incarnated as the following historical figures. So he incarnated as Christopher Columbus. I don't know about that. I think that guy was a piece of shit. Like, founding father, found what was already fucking existed, whatever. Francis Bacon, we talked about. Shakespeare's Scientific Revolution. Hesiod, Greek poet. Okay, this is interesting. The high priest in the civilization of Atlantis, 13,000 years ago, serving in the order of the Lord Zadkiel in the Temple of Purification, located in an Atlantean colony that had been set out from the main island of Atlantis that had been established on the island now called Cuba. And that really reminded me a lot of Old World Florida, because Old World Florida talks about Florida being the real Garden of Eden, the Gulf of Mexico being the true Fertile Crescent, and Cuba being special, and Atlantis, how Atlantis was close to that area. So that was very interesting to me. Merlin, a mythological magician and counselor at Camelot who inspired the establishment of the Order of the Knights of the Round Table. Okay, organizer behind the scenes for the secret societies in Germany in the late 14th and early 15th centuries. The creation of a possibly fictional character named Christian Rosenkreuz that inspired by his efforts. Really weird. Reminds me a lot of the Georgia Guidestones, R.C. Christian. Very strange. Rosicrucian. Okay. Plato. So Saint Germain was Plato. Proclus, last major Greek Neoplatonic philosopher, head of Plato's Academy in Athens. Roger Bacon, 1220 to 1292. British philosopher, educational reformer, and experimental scientist. Alchemy, optics, math, language. Okay. Ruler of a golden age civilization centered in a city called the City of the Sun, 70,000 years ago, located in the then lush and verdant area that is now the Sahara Desert, originally a colony set out from Atlantis. Okay, that blew my mind. I think that's true because I've heard a lot of shit about that. So, number one, we have old world maps, old world depictions of Africa and the Middle East being lush and green and verdant. And we also have the Eye of Atlantis, or this kind of geoglyph, or you want to call it pareidolia, whatever, but basically this like thing in the desert that looks like an eye, and it's all giant, and it looks like it could be this Atlantean kind of structure. So I thought that was great. That really aligned with me. Like I said, I don't know about these New Agers, these Theosophists, but there definitely is some truth in what they're talking about, because if you're going to talk about Atlantis and the past, at least they're talking about it, right? Okay, St. Alban, first British martyr, sheltered a fugitive priest, converted to Christianity, and then was put to death for disguising himself as the priest so he could die in his place. So there's a lot of ties to Saint Germain in the Sky. And if you think about that, that is totally sacrifice. That's basically like ego death. That's putting someone else before yourself. And so that is a positive attribute. That is empathy and ultimate compassion, ultimate sacrifice. So I think that is a very positive aspect of the Saint Germain experience. And then they also believe he was Saint Joseph, husband of Mary, and Samuel, biblical prophet and seer. I cannot reiterate enough that very little of what is written about the comp can be verified. Italicized, emphasized. These are teachings according to a lot of New Age types who have various nefarious agendas, but it's interesting to note what archetypal images appear and are attributed to Saint G's image. The Theosophists say that 50,000 to 70,000 years ago, Saint Germain was the high priest of the Violet Flame Temple in the Sahara City of the Sun, and he led his followers along the path of cosmic consciousness, but they succumbed to worldly pleasures, and he led them to their fates. So we always see this idea. We see it in Sodom and Gomorrah. We see it with Atlantis, the fall of man, like decadence and worldly pleasures, and the material subverting the spiritual. After appearing as Merlin, he appeared as Roger Bacon, a scientist, alchemist, and contemporary of St. Albertus Magnus, repeatedly the greatest mind of his age. Bacon believed so fiercely in the existence of the Philosopher's Stone and the elixir of life and their alchemical potential that others followed his example based solely on his passionate and learned arguments. His Franciscan brothers did not always share his enthusiasm, however, and kept him in confinement for 14 years as punishment for his heresies. Francis Bacon, like Saint Germain, was known as a Rosicrucian, which I will get into during this next section. It was said that Saint Germain Bacon knew Paracelsus, 1493 to 1541, who studied his secret elixir composed of 777 ingredients. The ascension into masterhood. According to his ascended master teachings, Francis Bacon made it appear that he died on Easter Sunday, 9th of April, 1626. You guys, that's fucking nuts, because yesterday was Easter Sunday, April 9th, 2023. Today is April 10th, but that just kind of blew my mind that Easter Sunday was the exact same day in 1626 as it was in 2023. And even attended his own funeral in disguise. It is believed that he then traveled secretly to Transylvania, then was the seat of the Hungarian Empire, or not seat, but host of the Hungarian Empire, now Romania, to the Rákóczi mansion of the noble family of Hungary. Finally, on May 1st, 1684, he is believed to have attained, by his knowledge of alchemy, his physical ascension, attaining immortality and eternal youth, the 6th level of initiation. At which time, so going back a few podcasts, Theosophy has to do with immortality. That has to do with cosmism. That's why cosmism was tied to the Theosophists. Because it has to do with cheating death. And it's pretty crazy. Okay. His last official appearance was in 1822, when, according to occult lore, he retired to the Himalayas, secret home of the Ascended Masters. From there, he reportedly helped MPB found the Theosophical Society in 1875, aided by the Masters Moria and Kuthumi. What kind of name is that, Kuthumi? That sounds fucking, fake as fuck. The Comte administered the 7th ray. If you know anything about, archons in Egypt, and Re and Ra, it's sinister. Okay, that's what I'm saying. This is really hard to discern, because there's a lot of sinister stuff, but there's a lot of, good stuff, too. It's very gray. Okay, in Theosophical Universe, responsible for ceremony and ritual, mysterious sightings continued, with rumored appearances in Paris in 1835 and Milan in 1867. Where are we at? An hour and 2 minutes. Woo! And I haven't fucked up once. Oh my god. This is incredible. I'm getting way better at podcasting. My first podcast was a fucking shit show. My god. Okay. I'm getting better. Okay. Madame Blavatsky in 1897 stated that Saint Germain spoke to her. He revealed that he really came from an unknown land called Shambhala, far below the Himalayan mountains, where descendants of the lost city of Atlantis dwell. From time to time, agents of Shambhala walked abroad in the world, trying to turn mankind into a more spiritual development. Christ, Buddha, and Muhammad were some of these agents, and so was S.G. Blavatsky, or HPB, added, the people of Hindu and Egyptian hierophants. Hierophant is basically a religious leader. That's the card in the tarot. The Hierophant is the religious kind of card. Sorry guys, I just had to put that in there. Where am I? Okay. The Egyptian Hierophant, the holder of the secret of knowledge of the East, was not appreciated for who he truly was. So, we kind of see Saint Germain as this figure trying to bridge West and East, the two hemispheres of the brain, the male and the female, the yin and the yang. We see this. And I see this much more with Saint Germain than I do with Aleister Crowley, because Saint Germain brought positivity into the world, and mystery and intrigue, and if anything, mystery and intrigue is always gonna entice humanity and make us ask more questions, right? So I see Saint Germain ultimately as being positive, even if he is associated with a few bad cats. But Aleister Crowley can fuck himself. He's deplorable. I mean, he literally just, he was the wickedest man in the world, but, I mean, he just infected everything with his infection, so. Okay, gotta continue. I'm almost to finish, guys. Promise. Okay. Annie Besant, October 1st, 1847 to 20th September 1933, was a British socialist, theosophist, Freemason, women's rights and home rule activist, educationist, and campaigner for Indian nationalism. And that's like Eastern Indian nationalism. So I thought this was, I just did this research today, actually. Like, it was last minute, and it leads to some interesting roads for sure. Woo. Regarded as a champion of human freedom, she was an ardent supporter of both Irish and Indian self-rule. She was also a prolific author with over 300 books and pamphlets to her credit. As an educationist, her contributions included being one of the founders of the Banaras Hindu University. For 15 years, Besant was a public proponent in England of atheism and scientific materialism. So that's where she was really into atheism and secularism prior to theosophy. And then she gets a little bit into theosophy after she meets HPB. Besant's goal was to provide employment, better living conditions, and proper education for the poor. And so, like, and to her credit, like, that's why, like, I was a socialist in college, because I grew up poor, and I just thought, why should the rich, like, control everything? Like, I was like, this is fucking evil. And so, you know, I don't think anything that she wanted, employment, better living conditions, proper education for the poor, I don't think that was bad. You know, but, you know, she probably got led astray by the controllers and the bad elements of our society that basically, you know, good, willing people that want better conditions for people are taught to believe a crock of bullshit. But it's actually antithetical to what they actually should be thinking. Okay. Therefore, she became involved with union actions, including the Bloody Sunday demonstrations and the London Match Girls strikes of 1888. She was a leading speaker for both the Fabian Society and the Marxist Social Democratic Federation, the SDF. Okay. In 1890, Besant met Helena Blavatsky, and over the next few years, her interest in theosophy grew, whilst her interest in secular manners waned. So she became religious in the sense that at least theosophy, like, she wasn't atheist anymore. So I would say that's good, but bad, I don't know. It's hard to say. Hard to say. You know, like I said, this is all just information, good or bad. I'm not judging, I'm just putting it out there. She became a member of the Theosophical Society and a prominent lecturer on the subject. As part of her theosophy-related work, she traveled to India. So I've been to India, and it made me want to live in Asia, so then I lived in Thailand. So India is very powerful in terms of, like, what it can do to the human psyche. In 1898, she established... Okay, so basically she did a lot of stuff in India. I'm going to skip that part. Okay, so I'm going to read this last part because it blew my mind. Besant also became involved with politics in India. When World War I broke out in 1914, she helped launch the Home Rule League to campaign for democracy in India and dominion status within the British Empire. This led to her election as president of the Indian National Congress in late 1917. In the late 1920s, Besant traveled to the United States with her protege and adopted son, Jiddu Krishnamurti, who she claimed was the new Messiah and incarnation of Buddha. Krishnamurti rejected these claims in 1929. After the war, she continued her campaign for Indian independence and for the causes of theosophy until her death in 1933. Okay, so mind blow. It was Jiddu Krishnamurti who said the famous quote, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." He was also friends with Aldous Huxley. Fucking mind blow. Okay. Besant's foreword to Oakley's 1911 book is as follows. Mrs. Cooper's painstaking research is so well known. Okay, so this is like basically the book about Saint Germain by this Mrs. Cooper Oakley. And this is the foreword of that book in 1911. And so she says, Mrs. Cooper has traveled far and wide over Europe, visiting famous libraries in order to collect, with long perseverance and unworried exertion, the material which we read at our ease, in comfortable armchairs, with their feet over the fender. We owe her attention and our gratitude. The great occultist and brother of the White Lodge, fragments of whose life are herein given, was the greatest force behind in the intellectual reforming movement which received its death blow in the outbreak of the French Revolution. Phoenix-like, it has re-arisen, and it reappeared in the 19th century as the Theosophical Society, of which the Great Brother is one of the recognized leaders. Still living in the same body, the perennial youth of which astonished the observers of the 18th century. He has fulfilled the prophecy made to Madame d'Amer, that he would show himself again a century after his farewell to her. And in the growing spiritual movement, which is seen around us on every side, he will be one of the acknowledged chiefs. Profoundly interesting, therefore, must be every detail that can be gathered of his 18th century life, and much is gathered here. Okay. Woohoo, guys! Last section. I am at the end of this journey, thank God. And my next podcast will be about Kenneth Anger. Because I listened to this podcast about Kinsey and Kenneth Anger and Crowley and pedophilia and, like, oh my God, guys. Like, it was the most horrifying shit I've ever heard in my life. So I'm gonna make a huge mind map about Kenneth Anger because I feel like he's like an octopus. He's connected to all the dark shit. Like, so can't wait to research that one. Alright, guys, so this is gonna be the last section before I retire the subject. I hope you guys had a great experience of this. I just know that when I first learned about Saint Germain, I thought, this is fucking cool. I want to know more about this. So, Part 4, Occult Ties, Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, Philalethes, and the Curse of Cardophilus. Count Saint Germain was very much tied to secret societies, Freemasonry, and Rosicrucianism. Whether he was a member for these societies for good or ill sincerely remains unknown to me, as SG is a perpetual paradox of both shadow qualities and light qualities. It was in Vienna that he founded the Society of Asiatic Brothers, the Knights of Light, an alchemical movement. In 1777, Saint Germain was in Germany, where he and Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel were involved with the Masonic Rite of the Strict Observance, which claimed Knights Templar origins for Freemasonry. And I don't like the Knights Templar at all. Although there is no historical record of Saint Germain being active in the craft, Cagliostro later claimed to have received Masonic initiation from him, and HPB reported that SG passed on to an English Freemason certain documents relating to the history of Masonry and containing the key to more than one misunderstood mystery. She also asserts that he belonged to the Martinist-related Masonic Rite of the Philalethes, whose members made a special study of the occult sciences. The Philalethes mean truth lovers, and follow the tradition of Platonic Christianity, which theorized reality as a hierarchy of successive planes. And that also aligns with Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and Theosophy. Saint Germain was said to reform Freemasonry, and I don't know what that means. I don't know how you reform Hiram Abiff. Okay. HPB, Helena Blavatsky, claimed that SG was a fifth rounder, or far in advance of most beings on the evolutionary scale, and points to his prediction and urgency to warn the members of the French monarchy of their inevitable doom during the Revolution. HPB referred to a cipher Rosicrucian manuscript of Saint Germain's that described the actual country where the Garden of Eden physically was. HPB claimed Saint Germain was a living mystery who has been met and recognized in different centuries, alluding to the tradition that he knew the secret of prolonging life. Okay, so, whoo,